Well, hello. Welcome back to another exciting edition of Coffee with Steven. So, this week's blog is all about the upcoming case of New York Rifle and Pistol versus the City of New York. The blog's actually entitled The First Monday in October, and there's a very specific reason for that. The Supreme Court of the United States begins each new year with its sessions of focusing on oral arguments, always on the first Monday in October. So, this last Monday was our first Monday in October, and we've got a couple of really big cases that are going to be heard in front of the Supremes. The first one actually has to do with the Title VII that orients towards affirmative action, things like that. I'll leave that for another blog. The biggie for us is going to be New York Rifle and Pistol. Now, many of you have heard me talk about this before. I personally believe that this is going to be the big case when it comes to Second Amendment jurisprudence, certainly since Heller versus the District of Columbia and McDonald versus Chicago. In this particular case, there was a statute, or is a statute in New York, which prohibits people from going anywhere other than their residence to a gun range while in the city of New York. That was challenged as being too much of a burden on the Second Amendment. Now, it's a local ordinance, okay? It's very rare that the Supreme Court will hear a case about a local ordinance, but they chose to. And one of the reasons why I believe that they chose to has to do with the way that the appellate courts have decided to interpret Heller. When Heller was written, rather than saying that the Second Amendment is a fundamental, specifically enumerated individual right, and because of that, you must use the highest form of scrutiny when analyzing a suspect statute. We sometimes refer to that as strict scrutiny. Justice Scalia instead chose to use the phrase, it is a specifically enumerated fundamental constitutional right, individual right, and because of that, you cannot use the lowest standard of what we sometimes refer to as a rational basis test. As a result of that, the appellate courts, rather than, following a strict scrutiny analysis, have instead carved out what we call an intermediate level of review. This was not, in my opinion, what Justice Scalia had originally intended. That all notwithstanding, it would appear as though this case is going to be used to essentially come up with an established form of Supreme Court guidance for appellate courts in how they would analyze their cases. My prognostication is that it's going to be a 4-4 split. You're going to have the conservative justices arguing for what we call that strict scrutiny analysis, that highest level of review. You're going to have the liberal justices all saying that essentially the Second Amendment doesn't even apply. And then I believe Justice Kavanaugh is going to side with the conservatives. He's going to issue a concurring opinion where he argues for what we call a contextualist approach. It'll be interesting, but in the end of the day, it'll ultimately result in a heightened standard of review being necessary. This is going to massively benefit all of us. Anyways, the actual oral arguments on the case will be December 2nd, and you can believe that I will be blogging about them as soon as they occur. Anyways, train constantly, train consistently, train repetitively, and train with purpose. And above all else, stay safe.